Welcome to our 2023 MindBridge Edge Conference, The Human Edge. One of the largest companies in the world is a human energy company. Chevron is powering the world with interest in a wide variety of energy products available today and building for the sustainable and renewable future. Along with their journey comes an amassment of financial data that is unparalleled compared to most. With all this data, Chevron knew they needed to enrich the raw material and turn it into actionable insights. To lead this task, they looked for a proven leader in finance, someone they could count on to look at all opportunities and avenues, and they selected Ryan Mitchell. Ryan's an alumni of the Chevron Finance Development Program, a program that took him around the globe, quite literally, working on all manners of projects in finance and expanding the business. Having learned deeply about the business and the data that was generated from it, he was a natural choice to take leadership of this new team. Ryan calls his new team the Digital Insights Delivery Team, with a focus on adding value to the already rich data environment and supporting the global finance and operation teams with new insights. Please join me in welcoming Ryan as he shares with you his challenges, opportunities, and insights on powering their next generation of financial data discovery with AI. Ryan, go ahead.
Thank you so much, JC. Appreciate the intro. Welcome, everyone. Very excited to be here and able to talk to everyone today. So before we really jump into things, I thought that I would just give a quick overview, or at least that was my plan. I think JC kind of stole my thunder there, but as you can see, I'm our digital delivery manager for finance at Chevron. And that organization basically does almost everything outside of ERP transformation for finance at our company. So we have products around data enablement, insight delivery, integration, and automation. And as JC mentioned, we have a ton of data, and I am always on the lookout for new and innovative ways to create value with it. And that's really what brings me here today to talk with all of you. So what you might be asking yourself is, how did a company like Chevron find a company like MindBridge? And it's a really fantastic story that I want to tell. So, probably two and a half years ago, recently after I was announced to lead this organization, I was sitting around saying, we create all these transactions every day, millions of financial transactions, and even more on the operational side of our business. And our control environment, while strong, can only spot some of those mistakes. It only can sample, 10, 20% of the overall population of our data. And typically our controls and our findings are really based around the things that we know we're looking for. And so I started out internally going to thought leaders in my organization, speaking with data scientists and IT leaders to ask them, can you just take this data, right? We have a pretty large data lake at Chevron. We're talking, millions, if not billions of rows of transactions. Just comb through this and tell me what looks weird, right? What looks off? What's something that should raise an eyebrow? And generally speaking, though we have some really smart, really intelligent people at Chevron, that conversation would usually lead towards something that went like this. Can you do this? Sure, we can do that. Would you go ahead and score your data, right? Would you tell me, historically speaking, what are the types of transactions that have raised red flags, that have shown risk, that have been called out as fraudulent, right? And when you're dealing with the scale and the volume of data that we are, trying to go through and manually score that data to represent it back to a data scientist so that they can build a machine learning model, it might work for one use case or one application, but it's not going to be scalable across your entire data estate. And so for me, I was on this mission to find something that could basically solve my problem, and it had a few requirements, right? So I needed it to be unsupervised. We weren't going to have our people go back and manually score and risk and basically say this transaction's good, this one's bad, to create machine learning algorithms. Chevron, like many large companies, right, over the years, we've got a number of different ERPs, procurement systems, well integration systems. So not just the amount of data, but the types of data and data models are very different. The type of data, as I'm saying this, is, can be completely different depending on which part of the business we're looking at. And I'll get into a few examples of that as well. And I needed something that could scale and something that could tell me what I don't already know, right? Trying to find value in an area where you already know that there's something wrong, there's something missing. Sure, it's possible, but at many companies, we've already picked over the knowns, right? We've already tried to implement process improvements and control environments and other software vendors that more or less do rule-based application of this type. And so I was looking for something really novel and really new to solve that problem. So almost a year and a half ago now, I attended the Gartner CFO and Finance Executive Conference. And my favorite thing to do really at any conference is walk around the expo hall, talk to vendors, get demos, ask questions. And I had asked, this main question probably 2 or 3 times, and I actually walked upon the MindBridge booth. To no one's surprise, JC was standing there, and I started asking him this question and kind of explaining to him the pain points and the issues that I was having, trying to kind of find what at the time appeared to be an unsolvable problem or a product so niche that I hadn't heard of it yet. And as I went through and said, these are my requirements, this is what I'm trying to do, he went, that is exactly why MindBridge exists, right? We are probably the only solution, and I can tell you that thus far, they are certainly the closest that I've seen to be able to answer all of these different problems and requirements with one software package, with one data model, the ability for them to use statistical inferences, right? To basically say, it doesn't necessarily matter the context of your data, as long as we can compare one record to another and that record to another. With enough data, we will be able to, at the bare minimum, tell you what is a statistical outlier, what looks different from all these other things, and what is worth your time to go look at. And that was the genesis of MindBridge at Chevron. So from there, I love this slide, so I stole it from Robin. I know he probably presented it this morning. But what the question I was asking was already in effectively MindBridge's pitch deck, right? It was, here's what we're doing today. We have known knowns. We have things that are easily identified by rules, right? Early payments, duplicate payments, things that we can see pretty naturally. But what about those unknowns, right? The things beneath the surface where a transaction might look exactly like every other one, except you forgot to put the withholding tax on it, right? And the way that they were able to combine both some of these financial risks and rule sets, right, their control data, with this unsupervised learning was something that quite possibly I hadn't seen before. And I was so excited to get started and begin working with them. So fast forward a couple of months, and MindBridge came out for what they at the time called an audit in an afternoon. They came out to Chevron's headquarters, and we sat down with 6 months of data, which was probably 30 to 40 million rows for a particular part of our business. And we brought our auditors in, and we started going through how this thing works, right? Risk scoring, sampling, data modeling, all end-to-end process. And in the matter of, probably by the time we pulled the data and then went through the audit in an afternoon, in the matter of about 9 hours, we had de facto completed an audit that our auditors they were planning to go do this, right? And we had given them this insight, right? This kind of early indicator into what they were going to find and what they were looking at. And that was the moment for me that I looked around and I said, we need to get MindBridge in here. We need to see the full capacity and scale of the product. And so really starting in January of this year, we brought MindBridge on as a full vendor and partner with us, and we began looking at what are the next steps that we want to take and what are the use cases that we want to go after. So here we are, all of about 8 months later, and we are using MindBridge in a number of different processes and a number of different areas in terms of the type of data. So we're doing risk assessment with MindBridge. We're looking at detective controls and kind of reframing some of our SOX controls with MindBridge. Even some of the things where I would say the technology wasn't purposely built to do this, but the ability to look at monthly and quarterly financial close, not just the potential anomalies that exist, but the trend analysis and the ratios at a company level, at a legal entity level, at a business unit level. So we really set out to not necessarily just implement an audit or implement an internal controls, but try to take a broad swath of what do we think this could be used for? Let's try it in all these different areas within our kind of digital innovation organization, and then bring those results back to the business. So in terms of the types of analysis that MindBridge offers that Chevron has already started using, again, this morning, Robin said, start with GL. That's what we did. So we started with our general ledger analysis. And from there, though, we very quickly branched off into receivables, payables, payroll, vendor analytics, and are currently working with MindBridge on multiple flex analysis use cases. I want to take a moment while I'm on this page to just talk about the general ledger analysis, because I think it probably gets overlooked because it is kind of the legacy product at MindBridge. But the ability to not only do unsupervised learning, look for anomalies, figure out if your books, right, are truly correct and accurate, but the way that MindBridge logically takes financial records, which those of us who have been in industry for a while and have had to work through SAP, JDE implementations, Oracle, HFM, et cetera, a financial transaction is not really the same as a lot of other transactions, right? Very rarely is it one line item and you're done. It's account A to account B, and account B gets cleared by account C, and so on and so forth. And so one of to me, the amazing things that MindBridge does is the ability to not just identify statistically what those transactions are that might be weird, but also tell you why, right? Why is this an odd flow, right? Or, hey, this flow is odd, but it's not impacting cash, so we're going to decrease the risk level. And to me, for anyone thinking about using the product or just interested in learning more, that idea of starting with general ledger analysis and then kind of seeing where it naturally takes you couldn't have been more fruitful. The ability to take those transactions, risk score them, and then actually drill down into them and see from a kind of logical perspective what was happening, what was the amount, who was it being booked by, which legal entity was using it. All of that data that is quite honestly disparate in a lot of our ERPs, right? And a lot of our native reporting that we do was all of a sudden being brought together really for the purpose of risk scoring and anomaly detection, but it also created this really insightful view into our financial records that I'd never really thought about before actually getting in tool and using it. So, value realization. I actually started this slide with kind of like a pros and cons, and the more I went through it, I was like, there aren't many cons, right? This is a tool that I think will help will help customers of any size, any type, any industry. It's really dependent on how much you use it, how you deploy it, and how you manage that change within your organizations, which is something that I'll talk a bit more to at the end. But when I really think about the value proposition for MindBridge, it starts with efficiency, right? We can do things faster. We can do them with less resources. You can reshape the number of resources, the types of resources that you need, whether that's for your internal audit function, for internal controls, speed to insights, right? So I know traditionally in internal audit, you would probably spend a month doing your pre-audit plan, collecting data, maybe sending out some kind of questionnaires or interview type questions. You would eventually travel to location. You'd spend 2 to 4 weeks on site going through more data and asking more questions, right? You'd come back and you would try to summarize all of that and create audit findings and go back to the business and say, this is what we're going to come back with. Do you agree? How do we want to talk about this? So you think about the idea of planning an audit or planning a review, even an assurance review, the time it takes you to do that today, actually go perform the audit, right? Perform the review, ask the right questions, and deliver the insights back to the business, back to your audit GM, back to your internal controls manager. We're talking months, right? And now we're able to do some of that in days. To me, that's, if you can't find value out of that impact, I'd love to talk to you and figure out what you're doing. But, some of the other things that I just wanted to note, MindBridge is scalable and it's repeatable, right? Once we set it up to do GL analysis for our upstream business, we're able to pull in more data the next month, more data the month after that, and rerun it. And the mappings maintain, the general ledger accounts maintain, our document types maintain, right? It's all there. They're obviously, like with any tool, there is work to be done when you're getting yourself set up. But once you're set up, it is repeatable. It runs, it tells you when it's done, and it gives you a way to look at what it found and why it found it. The last three, it's configurable and it's flexible. And what I mean by that, and I'll talk through one of these examples in a bit more depth, is that, Chevron, like many other companies, very big, lots of different moving pieces, very complex. And so our supply and trading organization might not work exactly like an investment bank's trading organization, right? But the ability to go in and configure the doc types, the transactions, the currencies that we care about, to tag them, to potentially sample them at a deeper level, that flexibility allowed us to go from GL to semi-customized general ledger analysis, to payroll, to vendor analytics, to some flex use cases that are really complex, really granular, and really intense. But we've done all of that in 8 months. And I think that configurable and flexible nature of the tool is a big reason why. The last thing that I'll talk about is really the effective, trusted assurance, right? We know that MindBridge's algorithms and processes are being reviewed by external auditors, by institutions of higher learning. We don't have to wonder what MindBridge is looking at and how they're doing it. It's not a black box, and that makes it user-friendly. People can get in tool, they can leverage the platform, they can change the shape of their data, they can change a data model, they can try it again, right? It is one of the few applications where I would say, yeah, you need to set it up. But once you set it up, the amount of different ways, the amount of different times that you can play with it and try to engage with it, either to get a different answer, to test the tool itself, or to test your own bias, right? That is super powerful. And that is what we've found at Chevron using this, is MindBridge really is checking all of these boxes. And If anything, we're just trying to figure out how to better resource ourselves to be able to take on the various opportunities that we think we have in front of us using this software. All right, so I wanted to dive into, I kind of explained a bit of this, but I always think it's fun to show a picture of a large oil and gas tanker. So I took that opportunity with you all today. So Chevron has our own shipping organization. Super big. We own some of our ships. We lease some of our ships. We have captains, mariners, people that are on the ships, people that are at ports around the world servicing the ships. And for us, all of our mariners, basically all of our seagoing employees, are paid by a third party, right? So they work for Chevron, they get paid basically by what Chevron says we want to pay them, different benefits and whatnot, but they're actually paid by a third party. And so we go and audit that third party, right? Not necessarily every 6 years, but between 3 and 7 years, we have to go do our recurring audits. And this most recent one, we were actually engaging with our shipping finance department, and we were showing them an application of MindBridge for something completely different. And they said, well, you know what? We actually have an audit coming up. We've already planned it. It's in the works. So we're not going to cancel the audit, but we'd love to run the data through MindBridge first and see if it gives us any insights, any watch points, any areas to look out for. And so to me, this is, it is one standalone use case, but it really crystallizes, I think, the change that is coming in internal audit, in internal controls, and really in finance overall, right? It's not just what we do, it's how we do it. And so if you think of your traditional method, which we still did, it was a physical audit. We had about 4 weeks on site in an international location, 2 to 3 resources. We did our typical, 10% population sampling of all the transactions, and we came back with no significant findings. The MindBridge audit that we did completed end-to-end in 2 weeks. That includes data acquisition, that includes running it and then rerunning it with some tweaked control areas. We did this effectively with one resource. JC mentioned the finance development program that I was on. I had a rotator on our finance development program in seat at the time. She did it, not an IT expert, right? And while neither had significant findings, in one instance, we did this in 2 weeks with one resource, and we sampled 100% of the population. Every transaction where the third party that we contract with was paying a mariner for Chevron was reviewed, and it was risk scored. I'm not going to get into dollar figures in terms of how much a physical audit takes, because I think it's different for everyone, but you can imagine 2 to 3 resources taking an international flight, staying in a hotel and eating out for 4 weeks to only sample 10% of the population and still come back with the same level of findings. I don't know how much longer we can really advocate for the old, expensive, slow method of doing things. MindBridge brings with it a modern interface, a cost-effective manner, and for me, most importantly, that speed to insights, right? It's fast. We could do 4 audits in MindBridge in the time it might take you to do 1 in the traditional manner. The next use case that I wanted to talk through a little bit, this is really around creating value. And if you think of the prior use case as increased efficiency, think of this as increased effectiveness. So at Chevron, again, I'm sure a lot of other companies are the same. We have a SOX control around manual journal entries. And our control essentially states any manual journal entry over a dollar threshold, for us, $15 million, needs to be physically, manually reviewed and signed off by a supervisor. So one of the first things that we thought of doing with MindBridge, and I think maybe this speaks a bit to everyone's potential disdain for arbitrary value cutoffs in terms of testing and control sampling. But we knew that this wasn't the best way to measure risk or to provide assurance to our controller, our audit GM, and our internal controls manager. So leveraging MindBridge's GL analysis, we tweaked a few of the control points and allowed us the ability to find the manual journal entries within MindBridge. We laid out 4 different scenarios that would amount to a change in our control environment, right? This was not, hey, use MindBridge to review all the $15 million and above journal entries, right? That's a swap in, swap out. You might get a better tool. We wanted to transform the control, right? Don't think of this as review everything over 15 million or 10 million or 40 million, right? We want to review every manual journal entry that comes into our accounting books, right? Now, some people might argue, yeah, do that and don't have a supervisor sign off on anything, right? Chevron's been around for almost 150 years now, so sometimes things can go a step too far, but what we started laying out was new methods where we could review 100% of the population, create risk scores for all of those manual journal entries, and then only have our supervisors review the high risk manual journal entries or high risk and high value over 50 million, right? So we went through these scenarios, and I think what we found through this exercise, right, was not just a bit of efficiency savings, but also a much more informative and accurate control environment, which is the whole point of that control, right? We don't create SOX controls and we don't implement them and test them to show people that we can, right? We do them to provide some type of service and value back to our enterprise. And I thought this was such an interesting use case. And I love these visuals that in 2022, and this is just for one of our number of ERPs, we were taking just the transactions over $15 million. So we were basically reviewing 1,400 manual journal entries with an annual effort, not a huge number, but when you think of supervisors and executives that are approving these things, about 350 hours of time spent just reviewing manual journal entries and saying, yes, I reviewed it. When we ran that through MindBridge, right, what we found was, yeah, a lot of the high risk ones are also high value, but most of the big ones that we were reviewing were not high risk, right? I would argue that 48 billion in the lower right, that's low risk, even though it's high value, we'd get more bang for our buck looking at the 43 billion in medium risk and the small amount of high risk, low value. And so I think what you start to see as we go through a use case like this is that you're not just talking about swapping out an old process for a new process, an old technology for a new technology. You're really rethinking the purpose of the process and why it exists in the first place, and then buying, building, whatever it may be, but finding the tool that allows you to take that process into the future, right? And that can sound a bit hyperbolic, but realistically, I know supervisors, I am a supervisor, we hate doing this stuff, right? It doesn't seem worthwhile. It's not a good use of our time. And as a controller, they want a control environment that makes sense, right? And so as you start to bring these things together, you do get pieces of efficiency, but you get this effectiveness and this level of comfort that I don't think we're ever really going to be able to have in a world where we sample, right? Where we pick and choose what we look at, where a sign-off means more than 27 control points. And one of the things I'm trying to do at Chevron is really reshape and reframe that discussion And a lot of that is, hey, leverage the tools that can do stuff like this, right? We've tried to build our own anomaly detection, and I can tell you that despite the really smart people we have, it's not like this. It's not as good. It's not as resilient. It's not as scalable. So when a tool like this comes into the market, comes across your desk, it's worth it, right? It's worth it to try, because if any of us really want to transform the way that finance, internal controls, and audit operates into the future, technology is going to be a driving force behind it. And this is the closest I've seen to meeting that vision of the future with technology that we have today. One of the other things that we talked about, right, was this idea of intelligent sampling. I believe that Rachel talked about that this morning. And so again, just the optionality that we're able to create with one solution, being able to go back to management, go back to executives and say, what's your level of comfort, right? What's your level of risk that you're willing to accept? Or a better question, what level of risk aren't you willing to accept, right? And from them answering those questions, we can very quickly come back to tool, tweak control points, add in certain sampling initiatives, and basically produce a much more effective control pattern with a savings of effort, right, in a matter of weeks. And to me, that starts to check all the boxes that I think finance professionals around the world want to be doing and should be doing. If you can go to your executives, to your management, your leadership, and solve problems better and faster, right? More effective, lower risk, that's going to get visibility. That's going to make an impact, right? That's going to make people happy, and people are going to be able to go do better analysis, more high value work, more high impact work, right? The stuff that's fun. Sampling through millions of records, it's not really fun, right? I've done it. I think a lot of us have done it. I'd much rather be interpreting the results and coming up with a strategy about how to fix this, how to change the current state to something more resilient in the future. So here you'll see just an overall assessment of the various options that we pulled out, different amount of savings, different amount of journal entries reviewed. But the one thing that I want to highlight on this, which is really why I included it, is right here that in all of these scenarios, right, we go from basically reviewing 1,400 journal entries to over 300,000. And we're saving time doing it. If that's not a win-win, I don't know what is. So I'm going to talk a lot on this slide, but we're getting closer and closer to the end of my time. So I wanted to talk through, as someone who's implemented this and whose team has really rallied around the software and the technology, what are some of the frameworks for success, right? What do you need to do to not just bring this tool into your environment and use it, but ensure that it has an impact, right? That you really, not only test drive the hell out of it, but find some value in terms of what you're doing. The first area, and I will say that I'm super lucky. There's been a lot of hard work, but I have a great team that manages our data lake, our data foundation, kind of information models, self-servicing layers, all of the above. But the better your data estate and the availability of that data is, the faster you can go, right? MindBridge, we talked about it. There are things that you have to set up, but if you are a big complex company running on SAP, this is about as close you're going to get to plug and play technology. The existing data models, the MindBridge knowledge base, the templates that they have out there already. I would say that, for us, it was a couple of mapping exercises and then we were off and running. the way that they think through financial data, right? So those templates that I talk about, there aren't many other things like it, right? I think that anomaly detection is obviously a technology that others are leveraging, but having that understanding of like, two-sided entries on the GL and matching and clearing in AR and AP versus a one-sided entry like in payroll that you need to review. MindBridge has already thought about those differences, right? They are auditors. Many of them were in finance roles. Their technology is amazing, but I think their understanding of the business and of finance and economics is right up there. For us, I think, thinking broadly, right? Do not limit yourself to think that this is just an internal controls tool, that this is just an internal audit tool. Try a number of different things, right? Doing a third-party shipping payroll audit was not on my initial list of things to try, but when the opportunity presented itself, we took it, right? And you're not going to find value. You're not going to learn, and you're not going to move quickly if you're not trying just one thing. You need to try a lot of different things. You need to get in and play. You need to get feedback, right? You're using a new tool, go in, explore, experiment. We've even tried using like vendor analytics on payroll, right? Maybe they're both one-sided entries. Let's see if one of the control points is really effective and we want to bring it over and customize it, right? Being specific on what the outcome is that you're trying to attain, right? If you're trying to improve number of hours spent on something, then say it and show it, right? If you're trying to improve the effectiveness of your control environment, say it and show it. That's part of the reason that I shared those slides, is that it's very easy for people to say, well, technology can do it faster. Show me where it's faster, how it's faster, why it's faster, right? Of course, people want things to be done quicker at lower cost, but I think they also want to understand what they're doing. Where is this going, right? It's not just, hey, let's save the 20 hours. It's let's save 400 hours globally. Let's standardize our process and let's create a more effective process and control. In terms of working with users, with the rest of your business, right? Get folks in tool and let them play, let them experiment. There has been so much change, so much work, right? The past 2 to 3 years, I know that I feel I've been the busiest I've ever been in my career. I think there's a lot of people out there on my team that feel the same way, other folks in different industries that probably feel the same way. It's not easy for people to carve out time when they're unsure of the value or where this is going, right? So let them get in tool and experiment, but give them something that connects back to their current job, right? Again, the shipping use case was a great example. We went to our finance colleagues over there, and they were the ones that were going to have to go do this audit, right? We didn't just take it blindly to audit and say, go use this for audits, right? We found a use case where they said, this isn't data we work with normally. This isn't something we've done since any of us have been in this organization, right? The last one was 5 or 6 years ago. And I think by doing it that way, by thinking through the thoughtful approach of who's this really going to help, right? That's when a user then gets in and starts realizing the optionality, the ability of really any tool, but certainly a tool like MindBridge, where they can then see, they see the picture coming together in front of them. I will say MindBridge does a lot. It probably can do almost anything that you try to make it do, but it doesn't have to do everything, right? One of the things that we'll hear a lot when engaging with, internal controls or audit groups around the world is, well, I already have SOX Hub, or I already run SAP GRC. But we're not telling you to shift all of your work from one platform to another. I think the future of technology, the future of finance technology is going to be many different bespoke tools, right? Interoperability, the ability for things to connect back and forth. But if you want to track your audit findings in a different system, do it. But track the ones that you find with the most effective and powerful way to create those findings, right? Don't throw out all of this gold, right? All of this potential and ability that a tool like MindBridge brings just because you can't centralize everything in one place, right? Or that you don't want to centralize everything in one place. And so I think part of implementing is managing expectations. And I think if the expectation is always that, you know, one tool to rule them all, people are generally going to be disappointed. I think when you get a bit more specific around what's the opportunity, what are we trying to do, and how does it help you? How does it help you as a business and you as an individual save time, perform better? That's when we really start to see people not just accept change, but want that change, right? The last two, I think, making sure that business users and users feel supported throughout the change or implementation. This is an opportunity where I will kind of come out and thank MindBridge. They have come on site with us multiple times. They're always available to answer questions, to take calls. This is much more of a partnership than a, client vendor relationship. And so being able to support our people internally with resources that we, that we can leverage, that's been really impactful. And then I think the last thing that I'll say is to continue leaning on those kind of senior level sponsors, those innovation supporters within your organization, because not everyone wants change. Not everyone is willing to go through change. But if you get the right people aligned on a vision, right? On a North Star, I'm sure everyone has some form of roadmap of where they want to go. But just as an example, if I told you that, hey, we want to replace our manual journal entry control. Okay, 1 for 1, swap it out. Cool, it's great. It did the right job. It did it cheaper and faster. Is that really transformative? I don't know, not unless it leads somewhere else. And that's where I think this importance of saying our vision is not to change the way that we do manual journal entry analysis. Our vision is to create a continuous monitoring internal controls environment, right? Our vision is to create a fully autonomous audit function. Whether you get there or not, that's not the point. The point is that gives you the mandate in a way to go try these things, to bring them into the business, to test them, to deploy them. Without those visions, right, you're limited by really any one individual up and down the chain saying, I don't like it. It's new. It's too new. It's not new enough, whatever it may be. There's a million excuses out there. Finding that vision, gaining support and sponsorship from it at the right levels, and then using amazing technology like MindBridge and partnering it with your data, that's transformational. And I think that's the opportunity that a lot of finance organizations around the world have. And you're just going to see more and more of it over the coming years. But this is really what I've learned, what I've seen. These are my thoughts on both MindBridge, but also innovation and how to do it right, what the roadblocks might be. I know that we're going to get to some Q&A in a bit, and I'd love to hear from folks. Before we do that, though, I would say, let me know. I think my LinkedIn contact is on one of the last pages. I'm always more than happy to talk with peers, talk with others in industry, just have a chat about innovation. Please don't be shy in terms of reaching out. And, finally, thank you again to Robin and Rachel and JC and the MindBridge team for allowing me to come speak with everyone today. And it's really been a pleasure. And with that, I think we'll pop over to some questions.
I'm really happy you gave us a few extra minutes on the Q&A. I'm sure you saw it as I did. A lot of really interesting things from folks. I'm going to try to balance this. Apologies to everyone. We are likely not going to get to everything just given the time, but we will, document them. I'll work with Ryan, today, tomorrow, as we're hanging out together in the Ottawa office, and we'll try to get anything else, sorted. I'll try to get some more stuff out there, but I'm going to blend two questions together. So one was more around, where does AI specialty sit within Chevron, and, how do you embed them, or do you have things decentralized, that kind of scenario. But then there was a follow-up question that I felt kind of tucked into that, which is, how are you helping, like you said, whether they be internal auditors or other teams, actually approach the process of being impacted, right? So maybe those two things, like how and where do the people sit from an AI discovery perspective? And then what does that look like for you to help shepherd the people who are going to be impacted by using technology like this?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of kind of the org structure and what we're doing in the AI space, it really falls under our overall technology space. So Chevron has long been kind of a federated company, lots of different business units doing their own thing. Recently in the IT realm, we really tried to standardize and centralize as much as possible. So we have digital platforms. So there's a finance digital platform, there's a Wells and a subsurface digital platform. They all have data and insights organizations, which is where a lot of that innovation, AI, data science occurs. And the one really neat thing, though, is that beneath all the kind of functional platforms, there is a foundational IT platform that is solely focused on like the infrastructure and creation of tools to allow us to do these types of things. So there's a lot of centralization in terms of the resources on the IT side. Functionally, finance works across boundaries with operations, with procurement, et cetera. But from a thought leadership perspective, I would say that we kind of operate our data and insights groups from each of those platforms. We also have our own centralized community together where we're talking about things like unsupervised learning, generative AI, kind of you name it. And obviously at Chevron, I think the things that get top billing are usually more operational in terms of, how do we prevent, process safety issues and things like that. That's where a lot of our machine learning horsepower goes. So bringing something like MindBridge in to allow finance to kind of have the same impact without necessarily needing that same strain on internal resources has been really cool. So to the second part of that question, right? The end user, whether that's the analyst sitting in audit or someone in FP&A, we have tried a lot of different ways of getting people engaged. I would say that just a couple of the most successful ones, design thinking. So we've really kind of bought into that as a finance organization. And while we don't always have time to do full week-long design thinking sessions, we've created kind of our own light version. And so we're able to go in and instead of saying, here's the new tool, use it, we say, we think there's an opportunity here. We'd love to hear about your process and in a way, what annoys you most, right? What are your pain points and how can we help fix them? And then the flip side of that is really when we do see significant bottom line kind of business value, engage senior leaders early. I think this is a lesson I learned, and this is probably more along leadership than technology, but escalation is not admitting defeat, right? It's taking something of importance to the right level to get it solved. And so I think in a lot of cases, we can kind of butt heads with peers or people in different organizations saying they don't understand the value and they're not going to want to do this. They don't want to accept it. Don't waste your time and strain those relationships. When something kind of smacks you in the face as so important, so transformational, go to your trusted sponsors, your executive leaders around innovation, and share with them and get their feedback and ask them to help you, push some of this down and kind of gain acceptance alongside you.
So I guess maybe tying into that is a question about, outside of your more traditional role as it stands today in finance, what are some of the areas that you think these other digital delivery teams and insights teams might be interested in something like MindBridge? Like where would that potentially sit? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where at Chevron, we say, we can do anything, we just can't do everything, right? All at once. And I think though, to me, part of the uniqueness of MindBridge is the unsupervised nature and the statistical nature in terms of how it assesses risk. And I think because of that, it makes it ripe for deployment in really non-financial areas, right? So supply and trading is probably on the border. At Chevron, it's a little less finance as it is, product movement. But even thinking of things like maintenance programs and work orders, right? If you think of millions of work orders coming in every day, the ability to look through that and say, do we see trends in terms of which types of equipment's failing, which equipment manufacturer are we having the most issues with? How come out of 5 pump replacements for the same type of pump, one was, high criticality and the other 4 were low? Is that something that we want to look at and reassess? And if we can look at that and reassess it in near real time, now you're actually talking about changing your behavior on the ground, right? You're sending people out into the field with either a different purpose or a more focused purpose to get the work done. So to me, those are probably the 2 initial areas that I think of. And then the other one that's probably a bit of on the line between finance and procurement and ops is in inventory, right? I think that looking through your inventory, M&S inventory, product inventory, and highlighting those anomalies, those things that look weird, even the things that are just really stale, right? Why do we see so many things aged over 7 years? Like, get rid of them. And that to me is part of the reason I love MindBridge is if those are all really different use cases, but at least for me, in my head, I see a path towards solving them all in one tool, right? Yes, with work, but to me, those are probably the 3 key areas that I think, at least in our industry, people would be really interested in. But I'm sure that there's a lot of others out there.
So, there's always a question when you get into specific use cases and you're sort of targeting your, some somewhat tactical things that you've done with MindBridge. The question is like, transformationally or organizationally, how does MindBridge sort of fit into that sort of bigger vision of what Chevron's really trying to do and achieve? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think not just with MindBridge necessarily, but any technology, I kind of look at and say, first of all, is this transformational or not? Right? I think some technology it exists because we have to get stuff done. But I think when you start getting into the space of, unsupervised ML and AI and things like this, I mentioned it a little bit is, at some point we need to have a vision around what we want to be, how we want to work, right? Kind of what does the future, we internally kind of have, we always call it future of finance, right? What does the future of finance look like? And I think usually we say less low value work, more high value work. It's like, okay, well, I think most of us would agree, but how are you going to get there, right? And to me, I see MindBridge as one of those tools where it's going to help you get there. And to me, the real question is how fast and how aggressively do you want to go after that North Star, right? I think trust is an inherent risk with any technological deployment. And that's why I think you've seen a lot of comparison from old process to new process at Chevron. And I think the more that we can do that and show that value, the closer we can be to leveraging a tool like this to be more transformational than process oriented.
Okay. So then just pivoting a little bit back to your sort of stack in your mindset, there's 2 questions that somewhat come together for me as well. Thinking about the complexity of the data. Ooh, that was a tough one. Where do you feel the most complex data is for you, and sort of how do you deal with the level of complexity with the outcomes you're trying to get to?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, we have just our normal accounting data is pretty complex. I'm sure, Sebastian from KPMG probably knows the differences of oil and gas accounting versus your more generic IFRS and GAAP standards. But for us, I think it's the amount of data and the different types of data models and processes around the world are what inherently drives the complexity. We do have some niche areas at Chevron, mostly, to be honest, in the US around like production, revenue, and royalty accounting, which are required by law, and they're super granular and very detailed. And maybe that's kind of the way I explain it is, if you think of a normal complex accounting structure, and then you go like 4 levels deeper, there's a whole space there that it's not even one where it's like a human can't do it well. You can't ask a human to do it. It's too much. It's 100,000 wells with 20,000 partners, right? Like you cannot rely on someone's eyes and ears to manage that for you. So a lot of that becomes, systemic process driven type work, but how do we check it? How do we find what's not there, right? A process can be done correctly when it's done, but if it's not done and the money doesn't show up, how are you finding that risk? How are you being held to account or holding others to account for that? Those are some of the areas where I think it gets super interesting. And JC, as you know, that is a space that we're currently working on with you guys in the Flex space, because we know that there's a ton of value and a ton of opportunity there, but we also know that the answer is not to just throw 400 people at it, because that still wouldn't really make a difference.
Got it. So just a couple of maybe quicker things to think about. We've got a couple of minutes left. Like, one is around just novelty. Like, what, if anything, could you share of any of your sort of unknown unknowns that really caught you off guard? Not necessarily saying they're negative or positive, or just like, what were some of those scenarios that you kind of just went, wow, okay, this is something that really takes me to where we need to be, or you see the pathway?
Yeah, I mean, again, so I think for me personally, maybe it wasn't as much of a surprise as it was like almost just like a gratefulness of the way that things came together. I talked a bit about how MindBridge connects various line item entries and rows and in documents into an actual accounting flow. And I think for me, at least, when I saw that and I was like, I know what the front end of that entry is, right? Like, I've done that job before, so I know what that is already. And then the next line down says, oh, and it's being offset to a cash account in Panama or something. And I'm like, now that part doesn't sound right. And I think that, nothing eventually came of it, but that's the type of analysis, I think, when we talk about what are the unknown unknowns, what's the risk lying deep beneath the surface. That's the type of stuff that you get with MindBridge that I don't think you would get through a standard review process or kind of traditional process mining. And for me, it was that type of aha moment where I went, oh, they're showing you the end to end of each transaction, and they're telling you how rare is it, what's wrong with it, what, like, is it cash, is it not, is it manual, is it not? All of that brought together to me was like, man, like, what couldn't we put this on?
I think you kind of answered this question, I think, nicely a couple of ways, but I want to make sure that we do cover the questions, like I said, as many as we can. The question about, your sort of build versus buy decision-making process, because clearly you have some very great resources. You knew that, right in your intro, right? You were like, even the first time we met in Washington, right? I need something that can just show these things versus me asking resources to go and do it. So, that build versus buy, you got up to speed, obviously, and running multiple things in under 8 months, as you mentioned, but like what else was in your build versus buy that would help people to make sure that they feel confident in making that decision for themselves later?
Yeah, I would say, the first thing, right, is that, we kind of all want to build stuff. It feels very good to build and deploy a homegrown solution that makes an impact. But the more I talked with data scientists, and even the more that we did other types of ML and AI work, we did find that from a technical perspective, they're really smart. They're really great. Finance is a very different animal, right? And I think the combination of both the fact that anytime you're doing buy versus build, if the thing that you're buying has already been built, there's going to be a time value, right, to it. But for me, the other piece was the intuitive nature by which MindBridge connects and works with financial data. That to me was the game changer, because it was no longer, hey, data scientists, tell me what's weird with this. Okay, you tell me what you're looking for. Okay, I'm looking for, any journal entries that go to offsetting cash accounts. And they're like, I don't know how to find that, right? That type of work is really hard. And as you know, like, just to build one algorithm internally from scratch is going to take a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a decent amount of money. Knowing that you guys have, 3 or 4 unsupervised models that are already built, and pairing them with those kind of control points that are more, natural to finance, it made the decision pretty easy. But I will say, we tried it for probably 6 or 8 months before I met you. And that was probably why I moved so quickly to bring you guys in, because it did seem like just such transformative technology, but also like you were solving my problem, right? It was very personal in the moment of like, I want to do this. I have a vision. I don't think I can build it, and I haven't seen anyone tell me where I can get it.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. As I said, there's probably a couple of questions still remaining. I'll review that list with our team. Ryan, great to not just have you working with us generally, but actually to have you up here in Ottawa, kicking off Edge 2023. Super amazing. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. And for everyone that might be listening to this on demand, I think, as Ryan said, he's got information somewhere to connect with them, and he loves chatting about this stuff. So I'm sure he doesn't mind me restating. Feel free to reach out to Ryan anytime. So that's all for this session, and look forward to the next sessions coming up with things like Avi Goldfarb tomorrow at the keynote. Hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.